You need to be the calm person in the room. The reason people leave jobs is because the business owner was unfair. You see it all the time. Oh, I did all this and they didn't like it, or they didn't appreciate it, or they did something to someone else that I didn't agree with. And I'm leaving the company because that tells me they don't care about X, Y, and Z. And I don't like that. I'm not going to do that. Or they asked us to be dishonest or something. Fairness is the number one reason that people leave companies. Good people. So you really have to be the calm person in the room who's observing and not absorbing, but just observing and saying, okay, A, B, and C, got to figure this out. What can we do? What are some of the things we can do? Let's all talk about it. Let's make sure we figure it out together.
What do you do if there's a jerk in your team or a toxic individual who's having a detrimental impact on productivity, happiness, well-being of the rest of your team? There is an easy answer. There's also a difficult answer. Spoiler alert, they might be the same answer. My guest today shares some pretty strong views with me on this kind of topic. Her name is Kristin Zhivago. She is a revenue coach. She's spent years helping hundreds of CEOs and entrepreneurs to sell more by understanding what their customers want and, crucially, how they want to buy it. Kristin also has a quite controversial view on sales. So we'll be hearing all about this, about her career journey so far, including working with tech companies, Silicon Valley, and what she does today at Zhivago Partners. Some great leadership lessons in here about what it means to be a people-first leader, to lead with integrity, and how best to deal with those toxic people if and when you're unfortunate enough to encounter them, whether they be customers or members of the team. Do listen till the end of the episode for details on how to get in touch with Kristin, get a copy of her excellent book, and also how to join my Integrity Leaders online leadership community, or reach out to me if you'd like to work together. So without further ado, let's get Kristin on the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Well, Kristin, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It is wonderful to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. And I'm going to push you in at the deep end, really, to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, your career so far, what you do today, and why you do it.
I'm in business to help other people realize their dreams. That's what I do. And I started in sales and marketing at a very young age, mostly in the tech business. I've been in tech since, longer than I want to say. But let's just say it goes way back. And started an ad agency with my husband in Silicon Valley. Back in the early days, and helped introduce most of the technology that we use today. Still riding on the point of the spear, just totally immersed in AI these days, of course, and trying to make sure that we don't automate bad behavior. That's a big issue with AI in my mind. Which why the idea of leading with integrity was interesting to me. Did the ad agency thing with my husband for about 12 years, and then the Mac came out, and he was our graphic designer. He's also an engineer and an inventor, and I looked at him and said, you may as well retire because they're all going to go in-house with their graphics. And so he did. He was 52, and he started making things. That's what my husband did all of his life. These speakers are his. He was an odd combination of art and engineering. So everything he made was functional, but it was also beautiful. So I reinvented myself. I decided to help people do a better job of marketing in-house. And I called myself a revenue coach because I'd always worked with CEOs and I knew they didn't care whether it was sales or marketing. They just wanted revenue. And there were a million sales and marketing consultants anyway. So I kind of created an industry for myself and spent the next couple of decades just helping companies of all sizes make it easier for their customers to buy from them, which is my whole philosophy about sales and marketing. By the time they come to your website, they have money in hand, and you can either stop them, frustrate them, or you can make it easy. Did that for companies of all sizes, all the way up to IBM, Dow Jones, so on. I consulted to IBM for about 12 years off and on. Wrote the instructions for all their marketing people and things like that. So it was really kind of a fun career. But by the mid 2000 and I'd say around 2014 or so, I started seeing that well-established companies were having trouble competing with more digitally savvy competitors. They just weren't getting the digital marketing right. And of course, I knew about that. So started an agency in 2017 and have built the team. We've got about 20 people, but we're very scalable. We can go up or down depending on business. Still do the revenue coaching for all my clients. So I don't get too big because I want to make sure that I'm still involved. But got a great team, structured it basically knowing that processes are usually the big inhibitor for companies. I will say that one of the things that I came up with years ago that people often quote me on is that branding is the promise that you make. Your brand is the promise that you keep. And you keep that brand with your people, your products, your processes, your passion, and your policies. And if you're not a jerk, because I don't work with jerks, everything's good except the processes. People have trouble with processes. So, and that is really important now if you're talking about making it easy for people to buy or work with you. Your processes have to make that work. So we focus a lot on understanding what the customer wants before we do any marketing or spend any budget for a client. I interview their customers and find out why they bought and how they bought. And then that leads our strategy. So we don't waste any money doing that. So that's what we're doing now. I love it. I'm just having as much fun as I had all before, only I have this wonderful team now and it's fantastic.
I mean, it sounds good. Yeah. So quite a few things in there that I'll pick up on. First of all, I mean, when you're talking about your husband and blending the artistic and the engineering, that's so rare. I don't think I've ever met anyone who could do that.
I hadn't either. I married him as fast as I could.
Well, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I had been a headhunter in Silicon Valley and I met a lot of engineers. And yeah, there's a little story behind this. When I was 12 years old, my stepfather took me to this motorboat race, a cigarette boat, this really fast speedboat. And I'd never been to anything like that before. My stepfather wasn't even into boating. I don't know what happened there, but I was there and I was 12 years old. And, you're starting to look around and say, okay, what kind of person would I marry? And there were all these guys with grease hair and their cigarettes rolled up in their T-shirts. I mean, it was just back in the grease days. And I thought, I'd never marry anyone like that. And then I turned around and I saw this guy walking up a hill with a friend of his that he had been looking at the race. And I said, that's the kind of guy I would marry. And that was my husband.
How about that?
Yeah. So I met him again years later as a recruiter, and he was running a biomedical instrumentation company in Silicon Valley. And the rest is history. So I was 25 when I started actually meeting him, in a
Yeah.
business sense. And he
Wow.
became a client. Nothing happened for, 6 months, but we talked every day on the phone. And he got me into boating. The other part of that story is he fought cancer twice. The second time he didn't make it. But the first time, after he got better, he looked at me one day and he said, "That's it, we're doing it." I said, "What's that?" And so we had a 48-foot catamaran built in South Africa and sailed it home. But I've been sailing with him since I was 25. So
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story as well, because I know it's quite a personal one and it wasn't necessarily what we were here to talk about. The businesses that you've run and your expertise, and you touched on it already, I think, in your introduction there, but I think there's these two words on there, selling and marketing. And I think not just CEOs, other people get them mixed up and confused and not necessarily know what each one of those means. So what is the difference, and why does that difference matter?
well, you're not going to, my answer might surprise you. I think selling is dead.
You're right. That did surprise me.
Yeah, the customer is pretty much completely in control of the buying process now. They can talk to each other. They can stalk, research everything they need to know. And then they have like 2 questions, and your job is to answer those questions. So I don't really think of it as marketing and selling. In fact, I have a client that let their salespeople go and replace them with customer service people whose job is just to make it easy for the customer, whatever it takes, and whether they buy from them or not. And their sales have done this because of that. So the problem is nobody wants to be sold to, and nobody wants a relationship. Nobody wants the car dealer showing up for dinner. I mean, out of the blue. We don't buy things to make friends. We buy things because we have a need that needs to be solved, a requirement. And so we have money we want to spend. That's why people work. So they have money to spend. And it's shocking to me how hard it is to buy things still, even with all this automation. How many times have you set out to buy something simple? I was trying to buy a $4 a month subscription to Popular Mechanics digital version because their articles were interesting. And I had all kinds of problems doing that. I mean, I actually paid with PayPal. Everything was fine. And then I wanted to get back into the magazine and read the article that attracted me in the first place. And I couldn't get in. They kept saying, "Well, you're not a member yet." And I'm like, okay. And there was a little link that said, "Already a member." So I thought, okay, I'll click on it. It wasn't clickable. It was just a piece of text with no ability to click at all. This happens all the time, and people are kind of used to it. But this is actually the biggest barrier to the sale, besides not really understanding your customers. So I don't think selling, nobody wants to be sold to. Nobody likes cold calls. We all try to avoid that. And yet, when we start a business, we think that's what we have to do, which isn't really a smart thing to do because nobody wants it. So we really should be educating. We should understand what they want and then figure out how to give it to them.
I have to say, it was a surprising answer, but it really speaks to me. Both as a buyer and a seller. I'm trying to think. So the last thing I really struggled to buy was it was some sort of coaching or consultancy. It wasn't for myself. It was on behalf of someone else. And it's exactly what you said. Like, there were links and they did work, but they didn't let me buy anything. They were book a call. They were have a free consultancy. And we've all done it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, every business owner has done that. But as a customer, it's so frustrating. Like, first of all, nobody wants to do the call, as you say, because who really enjoys being sold to? Not many people, I suspect. At least not if they know that's what's happening in advance.
Yeah. There's so many consultants in my side of the business who say, talk about persuasion and things like that. No, by the time they get to you, they're already standing at the door with money in their hand. And if you force them through your funnel, this carefully crafted thing, they're just going to get bored and go away. They just want you to help them at their specific moment in their buying process.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess the second thing that really frustrates me as a customer about that is they don't just tell you what the price is. You've got to go through that whole show, as you say, the persuasion, before you even get to the point of them telling you what it's going to cost. And most of the time, that's going to be a number that you weren't expecting or aren't interested in or can't afford or don't want to spend or whatever. So they've wasted all of that time, probably hours at that point of, I'm going to persuade. And even if it's worked and you're persuaded, you're like, yeah, this is great, I really want it. Oh, no, I can't do it with that number. Sorry. And so you've wasted that success as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's more money wasted in this whole process. Billions and billions of dollars. People not understanding something I call the mindset when the customer sets out to buy. So their buyer mindset consists of their desires, their concerns, and their questions. And those are hoops that you have to jump through. First, they want to see that you understand what they want exactly in their words, not your words. And then that's the first hoop. The second hoop is, wait a minute, I've bought software before and I've had these problems, and it sort of looked like it could do this thing, but then when I tried to do this thing, it didn't work, and so I had to give it up. How many of us have tried software programs and gotten to that point? It's like, I must have tried, 30 or 40 project management programs before we ended up with the one we now use for our company. It's very frustrating. So that's the next thing, is you address their concerns. And then if they've jumped through those two hoops and they're happy, now they have very specific questions. They've researched everything else, and now they just want that question or those couple of questions answered. And that's your job. You need to do those things on your website, or now we're going to have agents that sell to you. This is going to be interesting. So AI agents, of course. If you get through those things and you do that properly, even just on your homepage, you're going to be that much closer, like 80 to 90% closer to making a sale. And I keep seeing, even in AI, if you ask AI, how do I grow my company? They say, oh, well, first you need to identify your core market. Okay. So you ask Perplexity or whoever, or whatever, and they say, well, this person's age and so on. The problem with that is that an 80-year-old guy will buy a blender for the same reason that an 18-year-old guy will buy a blender. So stalking your customer and finding out what they care about and all that stuff doesn't matter. All that matters is their mindset when they set out to buy. And those three components. And if you deal with that properly, now you can spend all your money. You can do channels, you can do social, you can do SEO, all of that. But if you don't get that right, you're just wasting. You're just throwing money up against the wall and seeing what sticks, which is not a strategy.
Yes, indeed. It's a tough one, isn't it? Why do you think these, I guess old-fashioned is almost the way to describe them now, isn't it? Approaches to it. So you mentioned funnels. That's the big thing, isn't it, in marketing and sales, and has been for a while now. Why do you think it's so prevalent? Like, why are so many people still insisting that's the way to do it?
Because they don't want to talk to their customers.
Interesting.
They think they know more than their customers, or their marketers tend to be introverts and they don't really want to know. So, it's ego. I think I know what my customers want. I don't want to ask them. That would be humiliating. It's all ego. And again, the problem is, as a buyer, we know all of this. I'm not saying anything that nobody knows. As a seller, the minute we put on our seller hat, the minute we start a company and our mortgage and our kids' college education depends on us making money and succeeding and not being humiliated because we failed. So we just go into it and start making assumptions and building these massive plans and everything. And no one ever said, wait, why did you buy it? And how did you buy it? How did you want to buy it? I don't know. It's a conundrum that has bothered me all of my career. I never understood, because once you actually know those things, all I do is interview 5 to 7 people of a given type, by the way. It's not a big effort, and anyone can do it. In chapter 3 of my book, I spell it out because I want everybody to do this. I'm so tired of people wasting all this money. But they resist. They're just like, oh, I don't need to do that. We don't have time for that. Let's just, come on. We got to get this marketing thing done. and there you go. Throw the money out the window.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of irony in there, isn't there? I mean, the
Yeah.
time, the money, like if you just do that. And also, like, sooner or later, you're probably going to have to talk to the customer anyway, whether it's because they're not happy with the service or because you need to know something else in order to deliver whatever you've sold them, like their address, for example, or, you know, whatever.
But you do have to do this in a structured way, though. I mean, these interviews are, I've done thousands of these customer interviews for hundreds of companies. And so I've developed open-ended questions that you can ask. And I've put them in the book. It's there. You can just do it.
Okay. Well, I mean, tell us more about the book then, I guess, is the natural question now.
Yeah. Okay. It's Roadmap to Revenue, how to sell the way your customers want to buy. And it is definitely a roadmap. I don't write books about one theory and then a bunch of examples. I'm done with those kind of business books. So I really start out talking about the buyer mindset and the seller mindset, the things we've been talking about. And then chapter 3, I give you exact instructions on how to do this. I published the book in 2011, and you'd be like, oh, wow, that's going to be an old book. But I've double and triple checked that book. And when we did the audio version, I listened to it all again. The only thing that's changed is this idea of the mindset, excuse me, which is a more recent thing for me. And then the fact that you use Zoom audio instead of the phone to interview them. That's the only thing that's changed. Everything else, humans don't change what they're doing that much in spite of all the technological advances. And again, I've been on top of that for all my career. But humans don't change how they make buying decisions that much. So it's all still valid.
Fair enough. I mean, I'm adding it to my reading list, certainly.
Great.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we've talked a little bit already about how that process of buying has changed in the last few years. I mean, is there anything else that you want to add to that? And then I'll have a follow-up question.
No, I think we can keep going.
Okay. So how do you see it changing now in the future? What's going to be different, do you think, in, say, the next decade?
Well, this is the age of, and this age might last 2 months. This is the age of AI. And not only that, but it's the age of AI agents. So websites may become irrelevant and obsolete. There's a guy that I have a lot of respect for, Flint McLaughlin, actually has created an AI platform that we're starting to put in place for ourselves and our clients. He's done a great job with it, but he has a marketing research firm, and they've been doing a lot of good stuff for, 30 years. He has this vision, and a lot of other people do too now, that you won't go to a website. You'd go to some site, but there will be an AI agent there ready to answer, programmed to answer your questions. Now, again, if they're going to do this, they better know what those real questions are and what the customer really wants, or it's not going to work. So, I mean, if you automate idiocy, it doesn't actually help you. And I'm really worried that people are just jumping on this AI bandwagon and automating the wrong stuff or automating it the wrong way. And that's not going to work. It's real sad.
Yeah, I think it's like any technology, isn't it? And especially data driven. Like if you put bad data in, you'll get bad results out.
Garbage in, garbage out. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, we talk quite a lot about ChatGPT, don't we? And similar LLMs are available, so I hear, but I haven't tried the others yet. And it's for me, I always struggle with like, what has it been trained on? What is the data that it's feeding from? Because if it is just like the entirety of the internet, then I don't think we can trust a single word it has to say, frankly. like, and it's not factual either. There's no, as far as I'm aware, anyway, not yet. There's no actual vetting or third-party verification or anything that you can't have confidence in it.
You get a little bit further with something like perplexity.ai, which I've tended to keep gravitating towards as my primary AI research tool. The good news about Perplexity, and some of the other LLMs are doing this now too, where they cite their sources. Perplexity does a more sophisticated job of it so far. Again, this is all going to change in a week. And you can then dig down and say, okay, where did this come from? The interesting thing about all of this AI stuff is that you still need subject matter experts to make sure that the information is actually good and valid and useful. Ever since AI started really becoming a thing that everybody was doing, I've been asking the question, how do you sail upwind? Because I'm a subject matter expert. I've been sailing for, 48 years. And so far, every single LLM that I've asked has at least one thing in the instructions that would put you on the rocks. I mean, something as simple as when you turn into the wind, because that's what tacking is. When you're tacking upwind, you can't sail like this. You have to zigzag your way up into the wind. So you turn and turn and turn. When you do that on a wheel-based boat, when you're using a wheel, you turn into the wind. On a tiller-based boat, you turn the tiller away because it's directly attached to the rudder, and that turns you into the wind. So they would say things like, whether you're steering with a wheel or a tiller, you turn away from the wind. And if you're steering on a wheel, you're going into the rocks, okay? Because you always tack to get away from the land, usually, unless you're out in the middle of the ocean. So it's crazy to me that the subject matter expert aspect of this is still super important. And you have to program and build all the prompts, really good prompts when you're building or working with AI and trying to build useful tools, can be 4 or 5 pages long. And it should include the integrity part. If it doesn't, we're going to be creating a universe that we don't want to live in. I got news for you. I don't want to live in the AI world where people are lying and who knows what, where that came from. And I'm taking the advice of this thing that's been programmed. If it has no conscience, we're all in trouble.
Yeah, we get into the areas of like the ethics of AI as well, which I find really interesting. Some of it I like is scary. Some of it I don't understand at all. But it's such an interesting debate. And so like bias, for example, like how is that accounted for? How do you, I don't even know if it's possible to remove any bias from an AI language model or any other kind of AI, frankly, because best will in the world, a human is the one collating the data that's fed into it. The data's probably come from a human as well. We are, by definition, biased creatures, no matter how much we won't want to admit that.
I agree.
It's a real challenge. And yeah, I mean, there's been some pretty high profile examples of that going quite horribly wrong, hasn't there? On the other hand, so I did an experiment with ChatGPT a year or two ago now, where I put in questions that a frustrated manager might ask of a leadership coach, for example. And I was surprised at some of the answers it came back with. They weren't terrible. And there were a few where they said, unfortunately, I can't do that for you because I'm an AI and it wouldn't be ethical for me to do it. And that surprised me. I was expecting like sort of the high level, lacking detail sort of response, exactly like, yeah, just turn the boat. So that was an interesting one, but I might do it again. It's been a while. See if it's updated, but I don't know. Maybe there's hope.
We have to be careful. This is very powerful stuff. Even the people who've created it don't understand it. So we really have to be careful with what we're doing here. And I think one of the biggest issues is boundaries. You definitely have to define the things that it should and shouldn't do or assume. Or the big problem I have too is that it's so vanilla. I wrote an article recently about, or actually it was a section in my new book, and I was talking about jerks and how they mess up the world and they mess up companies and so on. And my definition of a jerk, by the way, is just somebody who makes things harder for everybody else. I don't care why. I don't care how. That's just what they do. And the nice people do just the opposite. They try to make everything better for other people, easier. So I wrote this little piece and then I gave it to Claude, which is a writing-centric AI, and said, please write this so that I can't remember the 3 words, but it was something that Seth Godin said. I really respect Seth. And he was talking about, you always need to say it has clarity. And there are a couple other words about, so it gave you the boundaries. And it rewrote it. It was very vanilla. It was so vanilla. It was just like reading, dead letters on a page. But the real thing that struck me is it took out the word jerks. It wouldn't politically correctly say jerks because it thought I was using hate language. So I was like, well, yeah, I don't like jerks, as a matter of fact. I just really hate jerks, actually. But it was the point of the whole piece. So yeah. It's not there yet for writing. It's getting better. There's certain things we use it for all the time. And you can, it's actually pretty good at social posts and things like that if you train it properly.
Interesting.
But just writing where you're thinking about something and there's original thought and you're stating it very honestly and forthrightly, it doesn't know how to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've found it. I mean, I've stopped using it for work purposes. There's a few side projects where I still experiment with it, but I find it can be quite repetitive as well sometimes. So if you're asking for like variations on the same theme, or there's like the same sort of core topic, but you're talking about different specific parts of it, you end up getting the same descriptive language over and over and over again, and you have to constantly say, no, stop. You've given me that 3 times. Give me a different word this time, please. And it's easy to get frustrated with it. But I also find that it's lacking that creativity aspect, isn't it? And that's probably part of the same problem, isn't it? Which, to be honest, I think is probably a good thing, because I think that's the bit us as humans are always going to be good at. And so we shouldn't, even if it's possible, I don't think it is yet, we shouldn't replace that part of ourselves with AI. Anyway, we've gone off on a big tangent there, but it's really interesting stuff. Bringing it back then to your area of expertise in particular, what would be the most important piece of advice you could give to a new business owner or maybe an aspiring entrepreneur?
You won't make any money if nobody wants what you're selling. So I love working with entrepreneurs. I love giving entrepreneurs advice to help them get on the right track. It's almost something I do more as a hobby than for my own, because I typically work with established businesses. It's a little easier. I had a lot of startup experience in Silicon Valley, and the cash flow issues and the politics and things changing radically without, sort of out of the entrepreneur's control. Like he brings on a partner or, they suddenly realize that this market's not going to work and they have to pivot. It's a very unsettled path. So I help people with the writing that I do. Can't remember how many articles I've put in Quora, where there's a lot of entrepreneurs on there that ask questions, and they know that they're going to get an honest answer out of me. So they keep asking me to answer these questions. So I try to do that as much as I can to help startups, because it's not easy starting a business. It's a step off a cliff. You don't know how it's going to work, and you're betting everything on your success. And you don't want to go back to a cubicle, whether it's in an office or a virtual cubicle, with your tail between your legs. You really want it to work. But you have to make sure first that there's actually a market. And just doing research, even with AI, is not going to tell you that. So you have to find people. You don't have current customers you can call and interview and ask these open-ended questions in my book. So you have to find people who might be interested and then start talking to them. And you end up having to talk to more people than just the 5 to 7. And you have to make sure that you're letting them tell you and you're not resisting it. Because if you have an idea and you've decided in your dreams that this idea and your spreadsheets and everything, it makes perfect sense, going to work. And then you go out and you start interviewing people and they go, oh, well, that's okay, but I don't really need that. What I really want is this. That's a hard moment. That's a really hard moment in the life of an entrepreneur. So there's a tendency to resist it. In the same time, though, they're really telling you, this is what I want. And if you can figure out how to give it to them and be flexible, do it. Great. Now you know. Now you're confident. The rest of it is just guessing. And guessing is not a strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you were saying earlier, it's the ego, isn't it? I've done the startup thing once, not including what I do now. And I saw exactly that. We started the business to do A. Customers are now saying they want B, but that doesn't matter because the business is here to do A, so we're going to keep doing that. And it's like, great,
there you go.
But who's going to buy it?
Yeah. You don't have a business if you don't have customers. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. You can get venture money. You can borrow money from your friends and family and make enemies for the rest of your life. It's not a good idea. And it's a big problem too. If you do get money from venture capital or whatever, they bet on 100 companies, assuming one is going to make it big. So they don't really need all 100 companies to make it. So their agenda is different from yours. You have to make it. You bet everything on it. And the other problem that entrepreneurs have is they start out by selling to their friends. And those people already know them and trust them. And then they hire a salesperson, and that person goes out making cold calls, which nobody wants. And they have terrible time. And the entrepreneur says, what's the matter with you? I sold the first 20 of these things without a problem at all. But yeah, you were selling to your friends. They knew who you were. They trusted you. They believed in you. They've watched you do this. They've grown up with you. That's not the same as making cold calls. It's completely different. So those are real common mistakes that people make when they start out.
Yeah. And also, I mean, best will in the world, no salesperson you hire is going to have the same, at least not at the beginning, the same understanding of the product, the same passion for it, they won't have as much on the line to make it work either. They're not as invested emotionally or financially.
You are absolutely correct.
It's an interesting one. I also feel like, though, particularly in the tech space, there are so many of those kind of founders they're doing it because they are passionate about that technology or that solution. And I think that's a big part of why they find it so difficult to change direction, is because, it gets tied up in their identity even. This is what I'm about. This is what I care about. This is what I want to achieve.
Yeah, and then you go out in the market and nobody else cares about it. It's a hard day.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, that happens pretty much every time, I think, unless you're someone like Steve Jobs, and there aren't many of those, are there? So
yeah, I have to say one thing about Steve, because I kind of grew up with him,
Okay, go on.
Yeah, and I don't mean personally. I mean just being in the industry and watching what he was doing. Hardly anyone says, everybody says, oh, he just told people what to do and he was a genius and he knew and all that. What they never say is that he spent half his day, his working day, in the stores. And then he would go back to the office and say, this is what they want. They want 1,000 songs in their pocket. That was the beginning of the little 1,000 songs in your pocket. You don't have to carry this Walkman thing around. You can have this tiny little thing with one button on it. He knew what people wanted. He was confident because he had been sitting there watching them, interviewing them. That's where his genius came from. And he was also just, a very brave individual. He really had a sort of self-made confidence once he knew he was right. And that's what talking to customers gives you. It gives you that confidence where you absolutely know what's right. And in larger companies, marketers don't realize their only source of power in an organization is being the expert in what the customer wants when they set out to buy. That's it. There is no other source of power. So and I have converted marketing people. I remember, I love telling the story. There was a guy named Rob who worked at Dow Jones, and he was one of the people. I was doing this marketing and sales turnaround thing for Dow Jones. And he was a copywriter, wonderful guy. And I convinced him he's got to talk to some people that he's selling to and do this interview thing. And I walked past his cubicle one day and I looked in and he was just sitting there at his desk going, I said, what? Are you okay, Rob? He said, I just talked to a customer. Now I know what they want. Now it's John. Now my customer is John. And now I know who John is and what he really wants. And he still to this day remembers it. We've kept in touch, and every so often he said, thank you so much for getting me down that path. There's nothing like it, because marketing is the corporate playpen. I mean, people just do all sorts of things because this worked at our last company and I don't read that, so I don't know why we're doing this kind of thing. It's all very subjective. And the marketer's only tool is to be able to sit there and say, nah, you know what? I talked to 7 people in the last month and none of them want that. They want this. And even the CEO will say, okay, that's the marketer's got the customer. Okay, we're going down that road. Instead of having the finance guy or the engineering guy lead the whole conversation, and I have nothing against finance and engineers, but they're just going by this very limited, here's what we want to make, and so that's what they should want.
Yeah, and it's doubly interesting, isn't it? Like when times get tight, quite often the first budget to get cut is the marketing department. And I've always thought that's totally the wrong way around. Like if money is an issue, if revenue is a thing, then you need to, that's the start of the story, isn't it? That's where it begins. If you cut off step 1, then no customers are getting to step 2, are they? So always very strange. But also you need that voice of the customer, don't you? As you say, and that is the power of the marketing department. Marketing as a practice, isn't it? Is getting that voice into the business, understanding what they're looking for and therefore what they will buy. And
I couldn't have said it better. You said it perfectly.
And yet, knowing that, I've still made that mistake myself, like at least 3 times in the last 5 years. So,
well, it's not easy to avoid it, unfortunately.
Indeed. You get tied up in the idea, don't you? That's the trouble of it. Anyway, so slightly different question, different angle then. I think what underlying all of these things in any business is the people. And I think it's a type of marketing, isn't it, in the way that you attract the right people and then keep them in your organisation. So what do you think is the most important thing that a leader can do in a business to ensure they are doing that effectively, getting the right people in and keeping them?
Well, I've already said I have this thing about jerks, and I just make sure I have a jerk test, but I can't talk about it because it would give it away then. But there is one question I ask, and how they react to that question. It's not the answer. It's how they react to the question. Tells me whether they're a jerk or not. And I do that with clients, prospective clients. I do that with people I want to hire. And if I do make a mistake and somebody fools me and we bring a jerk in, my team will quickly tell me this person's making things harder. And I'll be able to tell anyway, just looking at how things progress. You know, the good people just get it done. It's okay. Everything moves right along. And the other ones, the jerks will give you half an instruction. And then you do the work based on that. And then you come back with what you should, because that's what they told you. And they say, oh, no, that you're not remembering this part. Well, they left that part out on purpose to make themselves look good and make you look bad. And the big problem for leaders is, I don't know how to say this without swearing. I don't swear anymore. But there's this saying of somebody kissing up, and there's another word about something down, like they're being nice to the people above them, but not to the people below them. So managers are often the last to know that this person is a problem, because it's not happening to them and their relationship with that person. So they're wondering why everybody's giving them, saying this guy's not good or whatever. And people don't like to be whiners or complainers. So they'll just, it can go on for a long time, and you can have a jerk in your organization and not really know it. So you really have to be careful about that. And the minute that you realize that's the problem, that person has to be gone. It was one of the first things I did. Well, no, the first thing I did when I did a marketing and sales department turnaround is I interviewed the customers before I even went to the office. I knew what they wanted. Okay. So that once I got into that 200 emails a day and all that stuff, meetings and everything, I wouldn't be overwhelmed by the corporate momentum, and it would pull me away from the customer. So that's the first thing I did. But the second thing I did is I figured out who the jerk was. There's usually one jerk in 10 people in most corporations. And I would fire that person fast, with good cause, because, I'd figure out how they were behaving. I'd go back to the CEO and say, we've got to get this person out of the organization. And then everyone else who remained said, oh, good. She recognized the jerk. She got rid of him right away. Now we can do our job, and we just have to not be jerks. So everybody starts being really nice. It's a great system. So that's the first thing. You got to get the jerks out of your organization, or even jerk clients. If they're just driving everybody crazy, you just got to let them go. I've done that a few times over the years. Doesn't happen very often, because it usually happens if somebody started out being really nice and then they gradually got not nice. That happened with one really big client, but he asked me why I was dropping them. And I said, well, you started out being dismissive, and then you started being rude. And then you just went full-blown jerk. And I don't work with jerks. So he said, oh, golly, I had no idea. And I thought, okay, well, I've told you now. So, good luck. So that's the first thing. You just get that poison out of your organization. Obviously, you've got to know what the customer's thinking. We've been through that enough here. And then I think the reason I love the name of your podcast is because it is all about integrity. I'm writing a new book, which actually might turn into a whole video series because people don't read anymore. It's called Love, Leverage, and Logistics: How You and Your Company Can Change the World. Or I might say how you can grow your company and change the world. But in any case, that's the basic idea. And love seems like this, really flowery foo-foo kind of thing. And I'm I'm a very pragmatic person. Love is just taking care of something or someone. That's it. That's just committing yourself to taking care of them. You take care of your employees, and they'll just give you all sorts of loyalty and great ideas, and they can't, they can't imagine working for anyone else. You just take care of them. You understand what they want, what they're trying to do, who they are, what they're happiest doing. That was the next thing I would do when I started taking over a department. I'd sit everybody down one at a time in my office and say, what are the things you love to do? And what are the things that you'd rather not do? And then I'd reorganize the department so that the people who love doing that kind of thing were doing it most of the day. And we'd give the other stuff they hated to somebody who loved doing the other stuff. There are people who love being in spreadsheets all day, and there's other people who love being with people all day. And you just get them in their happy place, and they just love it. I mean, they want to come to work. They give you all sorts of ideas. It's great. So if you take care of those things, life gets real easy. Honestly, management gets real easy when you do that. You take care of people. The leverage part of it is that then means it's that good karma thing where things start coming to you because you've been so nice to everybody. And then the logistics is everything we're all struggling with all the time. The processes, the AI, more efficiencies in your business, all of that stuff. And you really need to stay on top of the technology. It's a big mistake to say, oh, well, I don't understand that. It's above my pay grade. No, it's not. You're the CEO. Okay. You need to understand technology so you can manage it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've just said. I think leading with integrity it's about that people first approach. And I think a huge part of that is what you've covered there, certainly in the two in the middle. No, the first and the third. But when you talked about identifying the jerk, so I would call them the toxic person. I think a lot of leaders, exactly as you've described, it takes too long to realise that person exists and who it is. But then once they do, they tend to, because they've not had that experience personally with this individual, they tend not to believe it when others tell them that. And I think that's where it really goes wrong. You have to believe what everyone else is telling you. You can't put one person above the whole team, even yourself, frankly. And yet, it happens so often, doesn't it? I mean, I've worked in businesses where that has happened. I'm sure you've worked in loads of them as well. We hear about it all the time as well in headlines and social media and all of that. And maybe some leaders feel like they're doing the right thing, that it'd be wrong to give up on that person too easily. And so we'll move them sideways, we'll give them a different job, or we'll send them off on a course and get them retrained, or sensitivity training, something like that. It rarely works. If it does work, it doesn't stick. And all you've done is prolong the problem. And in the meantime, shown all the people who are suffering under that individual matters more to you than they do. And so you're so right. Like, as soon as you know that is a toxic individual, they've got to go via whatever means legally.
Yeah. And humanely, I mean, you don't just rush them out the door. You do everything you're supposed to, but
absolutely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Everything you said is 100% correct.
Yeah. And worst case, it's worth the short-term cost of redundancy and having to pay them to leave, because that's better, I think, in the long term, even financially, because the productivity will suffer every day you keep them.
Yeah, there's something interesting about this. My husband and I had 45 wonderful years together, and we were in love up to the last moment. And one of the reasons was, I guess he was in his 20s. I don't know exactly when it was, but it was before we officially met. And he saw an old couple. We were living in the Bay Area. He was living in the Bay Area at the time. One of them was coming back from work on the ferry, and the other one was meeting. And I don't remember which was on the boat and which was on the ground, but it was husband and wife, and they were older, and yet you could tell they were still in love, and they were so happy to see each other, even though it was just, the end of the day and all of that. And he said to himself, that's the kind of marriage I want. So I picked the husband. He picked the type of marriage. And I learned from him that a good marriage or any relationship is not about me and you. It's about what we're building together. It actually becomes a separate entity. It's like having a kid, and you're building this thing together. And that becomes the priority. So the same thing applies to what you're talking about. If you make the priority an individual and everybody else is, sub to that, you're ruining the whole thing. It's just, and in the marriage relationship, if it's me versus you, then you're obliterating, you're draining the energy out of that thing that you've built together. And that thing becomes really special. And I mean, I can't even tell you how heavenly it is to have that kind of marriage. It's the best thing in the world. And I'm a very independent person, and so was he. So you would think we'd be at each other's throats all the time. But no, we ended up building this thing, and it taught me a lot about life and love and what should really work inside corporations, which are just groups of people. That's what they are. Companies are just groups of people trying to achieve something together.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a lovely way to look at it. And it feeds in as well to what you were talking about before about caring about people, looking after them. And you're right, like no company, like even the massive multi-billion multinationals, it all comes down to the people, doesn't it? And yeah, no matter how far you automate it, at some point a person has to be involved, or something critical isn't going to happen. So you can't overlook that. You can't ignore the people or put them anything other than first, frankly. And yeah, I totally agree with you. Like it's that old cliche, isn't it, about building something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that applies to any relationship of any nature, really, business,
Yep.
personal, or otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, what a lovely way to look at it. What do you think? We've talked a lot about what leaders get wrong and mistakes to avoid. If you could pick maybe one or two things that you think most leaders will get right, what do you think that would be, and why is it important?
Leadership is really about being calm and not losing your cool. If you see a movie and there's a bunch of people in a room and something bad is happening, everybody's panicking, they're all running around like crazy, you know right away who the hero is. You could come into a middle of a movie and you would know that guy or gal standing there is the one who's going to get them out of this mess, who's going to lead them, and everybody's going to follow their lead because they're absolutely calm. One of the things I tell my female friends is observe, but don't absorb. So fine, it's there. We see it. And it's like if something happens, if somebody says something bad to you or something, you just let it go by. It's like an arrow. It just goes by. And then you say, well, that was interesting. What can I learn from this? And how can I fix it? My husband had this saying, find it, face it, fix it. And I do that all the time in my organization. And everybody knows that that's what I want to do. We want to find it. We want to face it. Okay, just fine, whatever. I made a mistake. I'm the first one to say, my bad, got to fix it. I never shy away from it. I did when I was younger. I don't anymore. If I've screwed up, that's it. I know it. They know it. It's fine. And I admit it. And we just then, how can we fix this? So you need to be the calm person in the room. If you get angry, it should be calculated. It should be because that something really bad happened and you have to fix it. But at the same time, and I've been writing about this in my book, the reason people leave jobs is because the business owner was unfair. You see it all the time. Oh, I did all this and they didn't like it, or they didn't appreciate it, or they did something to someone else that I didn't agree with. and I'm leaving the company because that tells me they don't care about X, Y, and Z, and I don't like that. I'm not going to do that. Or they asked us to be dishonest or something. Fairness is the number one reason that people leave companies. Good people. So you really have to be the calm person in the room who's observing and not absorbing, but just observing and saying, okay, A, B, and C, got to figure this out. What can we do? What are some of the things we can do? Let's all talk about it. Let's make sure we figure it out together. My staff has great ideas and things that I would never have thought of. And it happens in almost every meeting. Somebody will say, well, what if we do this? And I'm like, bam, that's perfect. You get the gold star for the day. I give them a gold star in Slack. If they really are good, there's a crown, right? So it's kind of fun. But they want to come up with ideas and help because they know they're part of an organization that's going to take that in, and that the owner is going to be fair, honest, reasonable about it. That's really the main thing. Stay calm and be fair.
Yeah, I like both of those. It's interesting. It depends on the movie, doesn't it? I think there's other examples.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, because I think that there's a core point there about the way leaders respond to things, good or bad. Usually, when something goes wrong, is when we see this most often, isn't it? And there's that. I don't know if it's a myth or just like a misconception that the leader has to react immediately and they've got to be decisive and strong and all these other quite old-fashioned words about it. And I do think a lot of that comes from the wrong kind of movie. That pop culture, the shouty leader, usually a man, who just kind of enforces their will and personality on the team. And actually, I think to be a truly effective leader, you've got to do the opposite. It's exactly what you say. You've got to take a beat. You've got to observe. You've got to understand, and then gather input, and then make a decision, and then go forward. Avoid that knee-jerk reaction, because 99 times out of 100, whatever that knee-jerk reaction is will be the wrong one, and it will make things worse. But so many leaders do it anyway because we think that's the way leaders behave, and that's what's expected of us.
Yeah, you have to ask questions. My staff is used to this. I mean, instead of getting excited, I don't make decisions like that, but I do make decisions like that after I've figured out exactly what's going on. And I don't give up until I get that full picture and it makes sense to me. And everybody says, yes, that's it. That's exactly what happened. Okay, now we know. And now what's the fair and honest thing to do? Then you can make your decision. And I have not regretted decisions like that. It's very seldom that I come back and say, oh man, we really blew it. That was a terrible decision. Once in a while, something surprises you. You just didn't realize that this was here because the client didn't tell you, or some jerk didn't tell you or something. That can happen. But it really is about getting the facts, being calm, keeping everybody else calm, and they get used to that, and then they start doing it too. So they get used to it. You set the example for how to make decisions, because you can't be there to help them make every decision. Delegating means that you give them the tools to make good decisions on their own, and you do that by setting an example.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another of my favorite concepts of leadership is leading by example. So there you go. I don't know. It feeds into another myth, doesn't it, of leadership about being the one with all the answers. And I think the counter to that is exactly as you've just described. It's having that humility as a leader to ask those questions, to recognize what you don't know, to try and fill that gap before you make the decision. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure the results speak for themselves.
It's true. They do.
If you could start your career over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Well, this talk to your customer thing came as I kept helping people, and I would have started that sooner, just now that I understand. I was very young and very ambitious, and my older self would say, chill, just chill, okay? Just cool your jets, as they used to say. I mean, it's just, you can get a lot more done by staying calm. It feels like you're not working. You can get so stressed. Stress is self-created, 100%. It's your reaction to everything that's going on. And if you just stay calm, you feel like you're not working as hard, but you're actually working much more effectively than if you get excited, you get distracted, you talk to people, your friends, about your stress and all that stuff. It's a complete waste of time. Total. Just say, okay, I've got this. I have to do that. How do I do it? What's the next right thing, as my husband used to say? And life gets pretty simple, and you get really effective doing that. So I would just tell myself to chill out if I had to go back and, start over again. But I don't have a lot of regrets. I actually don't have any regrets about my life and business. And I think that's one of the things that comes from a life of integrity, where you haven't done anything consciously to try to hurt anyone. I've never done that in my life. My autistic brother, when I was 8 when he was born, and I became his conservator later in life, and we were very close. And he taught me about caring and taking care of other people. And the idea that you really are here to be nice and take care of people. He had really severe moments. And I just learned to just stay calm, carry on, So yeah, I don't, because I've never consciously tried to hurt anybody, I don't have any regrets.
Yeah, and that's a great place to be, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think that working hard thing, it's working hard and being productive are not the same thing. And I think we need to disconnect those two things more frequently, more obviously in working culture, at least in the Western world.
Yeah, agreed.
Because you're right. It creates stress. It causes you to create your own stress. Things like burnout are on the rise, and I think this is why it's even just things like how many hours you're expected to work and over what time frame. Yeah, there's so many things that are just completely unnecessary in order to achieve the output that businesses want. We'll get there one day. I'm confident.
I admire your optimism.
Leadership Heroes.
I've only got one question left for you. This is my favourite question. I'm really looking forward to your answer, but no pressure. So it's called Leadership Heroes. If you had to pick one person, and they could be anybody you like, alive, dead, past, present, real, or even fictional, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
My husband. Yeah.
I had a feeling that's what you were going to say.
Yeah, he taught me a lot about leadership. He was in the Marines back when it wasn't popular to be in the Marines. I mean, it was the Vietnam years. That's aging myself, but oh well. And he actually joined the Marines when everybody else was draft dodging. So he believed his parents or his grandparents immigrated from Kiev when the Bolsheviks took over. And so he really had a strong love for this country and the idea of independence and freedom and all of that. But he, again, because we'd sailed together so many years, and he was the captain. And when we were getting the boat built in South Africa, he told everybody he was the captain, but I was the admiral. And so it was kind of funny. But he really was the one who taught me to be calm and just get the processes right, and think things through and be thorough. Because I'm sort of a recovering salesperson. I was just, okay, great, let's do it. Go, fine, run, And it wasn't, as a leadership type of thing, it wasn't the right approach. And if you really want to be a leader, you do have to stay calm and carry on and do all of those responsible, caring, careful kinds of things. Preparation, big deal for people. So yeah, he was my best example and still is. I still love the guy to death. It's just, it's hard. I'm a little surprised at myself because I haven't teared up. It's been 3 years. And for the first 6 months, I probably cried more than I had in the whole of my life because we were so close. So yeah, he was quite an example to me and still is.
Yeah, fair enough. And thank you for sharing all of the stories you have about him today. And I think to riff on the nautical theme, I guess leadership it's the eye at the centre of the storm, isn't it? It's keeping calm when everything around you goes nuts. And it sounds like you've got a wonderful example there as well. So, Kristin, one final small question. If anyone in the audience would like to know more about you or the work that you do, where can they go? Where can they get a copy of the book as well?
So if you Google Kristin Zhivago, it's pages and pages of stuff because I've put a lot of things out there over the years. Our website is zhivagopartners.com. The book is only on Amazon. I decided a long time ago. I may as well just go where everybody's going. It's Kindle, audio, and print. This particular book is actually best in print because I take the different types of buying processes and split them out and tell people exactly what the stages are. And that's better done in a sort of a print kind of way. But other than that, yeah, and I have a blog that I write pretty frequently, and I'm in LinkedIn, of course. So all the normal places.
Okay, lovely. I'll put a selection of those links in the show notes as well, so everyone can find them easily. Well, all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a lovely conversation. I've loved hearing all your experiences and leadership lessons, and I learned something about sales and marketing as well, so that's always nice. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and have a great rest of your day.
I thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Huge thank you to Kristin for sharing all of those stories today. Some of them quite personal, all of them interesting, educational, and enjoyable for me at least. I hope for you as well, listener or viewer. If you would like to learn more about the work Kristin does, if you're looking for help from a revenue coach or with your digital marketing, I do encourage you to reach out to her. She's great to talk to, as you may be able to tell from the conversation you've just listened to. As promised, you'll find links to website, social media, etc. in the show notes below. Do click on those, go and learn more. And if you are a new leader, new manager, first-time business founder, you're struggling to get the most from your team, or you're having difficulty engaging with your people, and you are looking for help with your leadership skills or your leadership journey, you'll also find links to my website and my LinkedIn in the show notes too. Do get in touch. Let's have a conversation. No pressure, no obligation. I'd just love to talk leadership with you, with anyone really, as you may be able to tell from this podcast. So thank you again for listening or watching today. I hope you'll join me again next week when I'll be talking with my next guest, Emma Rainville, about the intricacies of operations and business, as well as leadership lessons along the way, as always, because that's why we're here. So yeah, hope to see you next week. And until then, remember, be a leader, not a boss.